After my NDE, I discovered something in Islam that changed everything. The silence of the emergency room was the last thing I heard before plunging into an experience that would forever transform my understanding of spirituality and faith. As a successful Muslim businessman in Dubai, I had built a life that many would consider perfect. A thriving company, a loving family, and an unquestionable devotion to Allah. However, beneath the surface of this apparent perfection, an inexplicable void grew day by day. That Thursday afternoon, while driving to an important business meeting, an out-of-control truck hit my car. The impact was devastating. In a matter of seconds, my consciousness detached from physical reality, and I found myself floating in an environment that defied all earthly logic. The place where I found myself was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. It wasn't the paradise described in sacred texts nor the purgatory I so feared. It was a space between dimensions, where light and shadow danced in perfect harmony. Time seemed not to exist, and each moment stretched into eternity. That's when she appeared, a figure wrapped in radiant white garments emanating a light that didn't blind the eyes but warmed the soul. Her presence brought a peace that transcended any earthly experience. She wasn't an angel as described in the scriptures, nor a jinn or any other entity I knew through Islamic teachings. "Welcome, seeker," said the figure, her voice reverberating not through the air but directly into my consciousness. "You have questioned much even when trying to suppress your doubts with borrowed certainties." Her words struck me like lightning. How could she know about the concerns I barely admitted to myself? The internal conflict I felt intensified. My entire life had been built upon the unshakable pillars of Islamic faith, but there, in that moment, something much greater was revealing itself. The figure began showing me visions that challenged everything I thought I knew about divine justice. I saw people of different creeds, cultures, and spiritual paths all connected by a golden thread of universal love. I saw that divine truth was much broader and more inclusive than any religion could contain in its dogmas. True faith, she continued, isn't in rituals or rules, but in the love that transcends all human barriers. You were chosen to see beyond the veils that separate men from each other. My heart raced, metaphorically, since my physical body was distant. How could I accept this message without betraying everything I had learned and taught? Anguish and curiosity fought within me, as part of my consciousness resisted these revelations, while another part yearned for more. Before I could formulate any questions, the experience began to dissipate. The figure smiled with infinite compassion and spoke her final words. "Remember, divine love knows no boundaries of creed or culture. Your journey is just beginning." When I opened my eyes in the intensive care unit, 3 days had passed. The constant beeping of cardiac monitors and the characteristic hospital smell brought me back to physical reality, but my mind remained immersed in that transcendental experience. My wife Amira was by my side, her red eyes betraying sleepless nights. "Alhamdulillah," she whispered upon seeing me awake. "Allah has returned you to us." Her words, once so comforting, now carried a different weight. How could I explain to her that the Allah I had encountered was much greater than the one we knew through traditional teachings? During the weeks of physical recovery, the memories of that experience never left me for a second. Every detail remained vivid: the transcendental light, the figure in white, the messages that challenged everything I knew. At night, while everyone slept, I found myself rereading the Quran with different eyes, searching for clues that could validate or contradict my experience. It was during one of these nights of study that I received a visit from Karim, my closest friend and confidant of 20 years. After hours of hesitation, I shared with him the details of my near-death experience. I watched his face gradually change from empathy to concern and finally, to something close to fear. "My brother," he said, carefully choosing his words, "this must be a test of your faith. Shaitan is cunning and can present himself in many forms to lead us astray from the straight path." His words, though well-intentioned, only increased my anguish. How could something so deeply transformative, emanating such love and compassion, be the work of evil? The peace I felt in that encounter was different from anything I had experienced in years of religious practice. Determined to find answers, I scheduled a meeting with Sheikh Ahmad, a respected spiritual leader from our mosque. The sheikh received me in his office, decorated with Arabic calligraphy and Persian rugs. As I narrated my experience, I saw his eyebrows contract more and more. "My son," he interrupted before I finished, "you went through severe physical trauma. The mind can play tricks on us in these moments. The best thing is to increase your prayers and focus on the 5 pillars of Islam. These visions are just distractions from the true path. I left his office more disturbed than when I entered. How could I ignore an experience that had touched the core of my soul? Each day I felt more distant from the community that had always been my safe harbor. During Friday prayers, the imam's words sounded empty, too limited to contain the vastness of the divine I had glimpsed. At home, Amira began to notice the changes. My fervor in prayers diminished, replaced by long periods of silent meditation. My questioning of traditional Islamic interpretations became more frequent during our family conversations. "You're different," she commented one night. "It's as if part of you stayed in that accident." She wasn't wrong. Part of me had indeed stayed behind. The part that accepted absolute truths without questioning, that saw the divine through the narrow lens of dogma. In its place, a new consciousness grew, broader and more inclusive. Rumors began to spread through the community. During a charity dinner at the mosque, I heard whispers about how I was losing the way. Former business partners began canceling meetings, fearing that my crisis of faith could affect our commercial reputation. The breaking point came during a mosque council meeting. When the topic of building bridges with other religious communities arose, I couldn't contain my new perspective. "What if our mission isn't to convert, but to understand?" I suggested, sharing a fraction of what I had learned in my experience. The silence that followed was deafening. Abdul Rahman, one of the most conservative council members, stood up abruptly. "This is bid'ah," he declared, using the term that designates harmful innovations to the faith. "First the rumors about your heretical visions, now this. You're corrupting our community with Western ideas." That night, I returned home feeling the weight of 35 years of religious identity crumbling on my shoulders. Amira was waiting for me in the living room, her eyes revealing that the news had already reached her. "Our children are being bullied at school," she said, her voice trembling. "The other mothers won't let their children play with ours. What's happening to you?" The spiritual void I felt before the accident was now transforming into an abyss. But, paradoxically, the more the community rejected me, the clearer my new mission became. During my nightly reflections, I began writing about my experience in a journal. The words flowed like a dammed river finally finding its course. It was through this journal that I met Sarah, a university professor who had gone through a similar experience during heart surgery. We met in a discreet cafe, away from the critical eyes of the community. "I also saw the light," she said, her eyes shining with recognition. "I also understood that the divine is greater than our human definitions." Sarah introduced me to a small group of people who met weekly to discuss transformative spiritual experiences. Among them were Christians, Jews, Buddhists, and even atheists. Each brought their own perspective, but all shared a common understanding that spiritual truth transcends religious labels. In one of these meetings, I met Dr. Hassan, a Muslim psychiatrist who had been studying near-death experiences for 20 years. "What you experienced," he explained, "has parallels in all cultures and religions. These are experiences that challenge our limited understanding of the divine." Inspired by these conversations, I began transforming an empty room in my office into an interspiritual dialogue space. It wasn't a mosque, nor a temple, but a place where people from all backgrounds could share their search for truth without fear of judgment. News of this initiative spread quickly. To my surprise, alongside the expected criticism, interested people began to appear, first timidly, then in growing numbers. They were questioning Muslims, Christians seeking answers, people traumatized by authoritarian religious experiences, all seeking a space of acceptance and understanding. My family went through difficult times. Amira initially considered divorce, fearing for the salvation of her soul and our children's. But something unexpected happened. The more she observed the positive impact of our work on people, the more her resistance diminished. "Perhaps," she said one night, "Allah is working through you in a way we don't fully understand." The most challenging moment came when my father, a respected imam in our community for 40 years, decided to confront me. He arrived at the center on a Thursday afternoon, his face marked by a mixture of concern and determination. "My son," he said, sitting heavily in my office chair, "you are destroying the legacy of 5 generations of our family." His words weighed like lead in my heart. But something had changed in me. Where there was once guilt and fear, now there existed a serene certainty. "Baba," I replied, using the loving term I had always used to call him, "what I'm building doesn't destroy our legacy. It expands it. The compassion you taught me since childhood is the same I practice here. That same night, during one of our dialogue sessions, something extraordinary happened. A young Muslim woman shared her story of how she had considered suicide after being rejected by her family for questioning certain aspects of her faith. This space, she said, tears streaming down her face, showed me that I can maintain my connection with Allah even when my doubts seem greater than my certainties. The impact of her testimony was profound. I saw my father, who had decided to stay and observe the meeting, discreetly wiping his own eyes. After the session, he remained silent for long minutes before speaking. Perhaps Allah works in ways we don't fully understand. As months passed, our center grew in unexpected ways. We began offering emotional support programs, workshops on different spiritual traditions, and contemplative meditation sessions. People from 50 different traditions found there a safe space to explore their deepest questions. One day, I received a surprising call. It was Sheikh Ahmad, the same religious leader who had initially rejected my experiences. "I need to confess something," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I've been sending people in faith crisis to your center. They come back different, more serene, more connected to their spirituality. The transformation wasn't limited to others. In me, the void that once consumed me had been filled with a greater purpose. I understood that my near-death experience hadn't been just about my own spiritual journey. It was a call to create bridges between different ways of understanding the divine. Amira, who had initially resisted the change, became one of the center's main forces. Her background in psychology and deep understanding of Islam allowed her to develop specific programs for Muslim women struggling with issues of identity and faith. Our children, who previously suffered from bullying, now demonstrated surprising spiritual maturity. "Abu," my 12-year-old daughter said one day, "at school they asked me if I'm still Muslim. I answered that I'm a seeker of truth, like Prophet Ibrahim when he looked at the stars searching for Allah." On a particularly significant evening during an interfaith sharing ceremony, I experienced again that luminous presence I had encountered during my NDE. This time there were no words, just a deep sensation of approval and unconditional love. I understood that I had found my true path. The true transformation of the community began subtly, like raindrops before a renewing storm. One of the most remarkable moments occurred during Ramadan, when our center organized an interfaith iftar. People from 70 different faiths gathered to share not just the meal, but their stories of spiritual seeking. "I spent 30 years fearing that questioning my faith meant losing it," shared a 65-year-old man, his white beard trembling with emotion. "Here, I learned that my doubts weren't signs of weakness, but doorways to deeper understanding." The impact of our work began to extend beyond local borders. I received invitations to share our experience at international conferences on interfaith dialogue. Initially, I hesitated. I still carried the scars of early rejections. But then I remembered the luminous figure's words. Divine love knows no boundaries. At one of these conferences in Istanbul, I met other Muslims who had gone through similar near-death experiences. We formed an informal support network, sharing resources and experiences. Our message was clear. Authentic spirituality transcends the limitations of dogmatic interpretations. The most touching moment came when Karim, my old friend who had initially rejected my experience, appeared at the center after 3 years of distance. "I came to ask for forgiveness," he said, his voice breaking. "I went through my own spiritual crisis and now I understand. The divine is truly greater than our definitions." Our family also underwent a profound transformation. Amira developed a revolutionary program called Open Hearts, combining modern psychology with traditional spiritual wisdom. The program helped people deal with religious trauma and find a more authentic connection with their spirituality. My eldest son, now 17, surprised us by announcing he wanted to study comparative religions at university. "You taught me, Father," he said, "that understanding different paths to the divine doesn't diminish our own faith, it enriches it." One quiet morning I received an anonymous letter that would once again change my perspective. It was from an imam from another city who secretly attended our online meetings. "Your courage in sharing your experience," he wrote, "gave me hope. I also had an NDE 15 years ago, but fear kept me silent. Now I know I'm not alone." The center transformed into a beacon of hope for people seeking deeper and more authentic spirituality. We created specific programs for different needs: support groups for people in spiritual transition, workshops on contemplative meditation, and even a course on mystical experiences in Abrahamic traditions. 5 years after my near-death experience, we organized a special event called Bridges to the Divine. To our surprise, over 1,000 people attended, including traditional religious leaders who had previously criticized us. Sheikh Ahmad, who had become a silent ally, gave the opening speech. "What we witness here," he said, "is not a threat to traditional faith, but a reminder of its deepest essence. Allah tells us in the Quran that He created different peoples and tribes so that we might know one another. Perhaps it's time to expand our understanding of what that means." As Sheikh Ahmad spoke, I felt a wave of emotion sweep through the audience. People from different backgrounds, Muslims, Christians, Jews, Buddhists, and even those who identified as spiritual atheists, were united by a common purpose: the search for a deeper understanding of the divine and our own humanity. That night, after the event, I walked alone through the center's garden. The full moon bathed everything in a silvery light, reminding me of that luminous presence that had changed my life. I reflected on the journey of the past few years, the pains, the losses, the discoveries, and above all, the growth. I remembered Rumi's words, "What you seek is seeking you." How true that had proven to be. Each challenge, each rejection, each moment of doubt had led me exactly where I needed to be. The next morning I received surprising news. A renowned university was interested in establishing a program of studies on near-death experiences and their spiritual and cultural implications. They wanted me to lead the project. Initially, I hesitated. My life was already so different from what I had planned. But then I remembered how each step of this journey, as frightening as it might have seemed at the moment, had led me to a deeper understanding. I accepted the challenge, seeing it as an opportunity to create a bridge between the academic world and the profound spiritual experiences that so many experienced, but few dared to discuss openly. The program became a success beyond our expectations. Students from various parts of the world and diverse religious backgrounds enrolled. Many of them had gone through their own transformative experiences and finally found a space to explore them academically. One of the most emotional moments was when my father, the respected imam who had initially questioned my journey, agreed to be a guest lecturer. His lecture on the mystical tradition in Islam and its connections to modern transcendental experiences was a milestone in the program. "My son," he told me after the lecture, his eyes shining with unshed tears, "you have taught me that true faith does not fear questioning. It embraces it as a path to deeper understanding." As the program grew, we began to receive international attention. Journalists, researchers, and spiritual leaders from around the world sought us out. Some were skeptical, others curious, but all recognized the importance of opening space for these discussions. In an interview for a major scientific magazine, I was asked how I reconciled my Muslim faith with the experiences and knowledge I had acquired. My answer surprised even myself. Islam taught me to seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave. My near-death experience was the beginning of a journey of knowledge that expanded, not diminished, my understanding of the divine. I now see that Allah is much greater than any human definition can encompass. Our task is not to limit the divine to our understandings, but to expand our understandings to draw closer to the divine. 10 years after that fateful accident, we organized an international conference on spirituality, science, and transcendental experiences. The auditorium was packed with more than 3,000 people from 87 different countries. When I took the stage to give the opening speech, I looked at the audience and saw a living representation of that vision I had during my NDE. People from all backgrounds, united by a golden thread of seeking and understanding. "We are here today," I began, "not because we have all the answers, but because we have learned to ask better questions. Questions that unite us instead of dividing us. Questions that expand our understanding of the divine and our own humanity." As I spoke, I felt a palpable energy in the auditorium. It wasn't just the excitement of a successful event, but something deeper, a collective resonance of souls in search of truth and connection. "Each of us here," I continued, "represents a unique journey. Some came from deeply rooted religious traditions, others from secular backgrounds. Some have experienced events that challenged their understanding of reality, while others seek to understand these experiences. But we all share something in common: the courage to question, the humility to learn, and the hope that together we can move closer to a deeper understanding of what it means to be human in a vast and mysterious universe." At that moment, I looked at the front row and saw faces that represented my own journey. Amira, whose love and patience had been fundamental in every step of the way. My children, now young adults who had grown up with an understanding of spirituality that transcended dogmatic boundaries. My father, the Imam, whose eyes shone with a mixture of pride and admiration I had never seen before. 10 years ago, I confessed to the audience, I believed I had all the answers. My faith was a set of unshakable certainties. Then, in a moment of crisis, I had a glimpse of something greater. It wasn't the end of my faith as I initially feared, but the beginning of a deeper and more expansive faith. I paused, letting my words echo through the auditorium. What I learned, and what we are all exploring together here, is that true spirituality is not in the answers we have, but in the questions we dare to ask. It's in the willingness to open ourselves to mystery, to recognize that the divine, whatever name we give it, is always greater than our definitions. As I concluded my speech, I felt again that familiar presence, the same welcoming light I had encountered in my near-death experience. This time, however, it didn't seem to come from outside, but to emanate from within each person present. We are on the threshold of a new era of spiritual understanding, I declared, an era in which science and spirituality are not adversaries, but partners in the search for truth, an era in which our differences do not divide us, but enrich us, an era in which we recognize that, at the heart of all spiritual traditions, there is a universal truth. We are all part of something greater, all connected by invisible bonds of love and compassion. The final words came out of me as if they had a life of their own. May we continue this journey with courage, humility, and above all, with love. For it is love, for ourselves, for others, and for the divine, that will guide us to a deeper understanding and a more united humanity. When I finished, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then, like a wave, the audience rose in an ovation that seemed to carry not just approval, but an energy of collective transformation. That night, after the conference ended, I walked alone through the center's garden as I had done so many times before. The starry sky above me seemed a reflection of the countless points of light I had seen in people's eyes throughout the day. I felt a deep gratitude for every step of the journey, the moments of pain and loss, the challenges and victories, the doubts and revelations. Each experience had been a brick in building a broader and more compassionate understanding of the world, and my place in it. There under the stars, I made a silent promise to continue this work, not just for myself, but for all those who seek a path to a more authentic and inclusive spirituality. I knew the journey was far from over. In fact, I felt we were just at the beginning of something truly transformative. As I headed back home, where Amira and my children were waiting for me, I carried with me a serene certainty. The void that had once tormented me had been filled not with answers, but with a greater purpose. And in that purpose I found a peace that transcended all understanding.